Thank you, Daniel. So a couple of things, I guess. It's actually great that I'm following Fred. Let me tell you a little story about Fred and how kind he is, and how a lot of people here is kind. So I met Fred probably I don't know how long ago. I think it's probably at least over 10 years now. I used to own a restaurant in the city of Detroit, and I had decided to have an Asterisk users group, and I did it last minute, so only like 2 or 3 people showed up. It was like my one buddy and then Fred. And Fred showed up, and we were talking about Asterisks, and he was like, dude, he didn't say dude, but he said, why don't you check out Kamailio? And I was like, what? How do you say it? Kamailio? And I was just like, all right, I'll check it out. But it took me a while to get to the point where I could take the time to check it out, because I had to go through natural progression, is what I call it. So I was focused on Asterisks, FusionPBX, and I had to kind of understand SIP, because by degree, I'm a computer scientist, but it doesn't matter, because SIP is his own thing. So it took me a while to get to the point where I could actually start looking at Kamailio, and I wish I would have looked at it when Fred told me about it originally. But Fred has always been kind and nice and understanding. All those things that you kind of heard him through the way he was communicating about this community and how much he really feels about this community. So Fred, thank you for all the inspiration, all like the dumb questions I asked you, and I know I probably bugged you and all that good stuff. But anyway, so the reason why we're here is really to talk about really scaling out FusionPBX with Kamailio. And I know most of you can do all of this by yourself, but I run a small company in Detroit. It was about 10 folks, and they all have different levels of SIP/Kamailio expertise. So I can take a set of requirements and give it to 5 people. I'm going to get 5 different outcomes. And that's typically going to deliver a bad taste in the customer mouth. It's going to cause all type of support issues and things of that nature. Because believe it or not, there's not a lot of kids coming out of school, or even folks that are switching careers, or software developers that are jumping to build or to be part of the SIP community. They all want to build apps, right? So, so I needed to figure out a way to do a couple of things. One, I wanted to get better at Kamailio, and also I wanted to be able to contribute to the community. But I was so busy like dealing with these fires, dealing with having to do the same things over and over again. So I kind of came up with this idea in September to really focus on building a kind of a framework / GUI, kind of taking the same premise that FusionPBX took, and where you can basically go get a VM, do a git clone, and do an install, and have this Kamailio configuration environment up in 9 minutes. And then from there, you can kind of customize. So that's kind of the premise of my conversation discussion today. So, who am I? I've been in VoIP for about 10 years now, but Kamailio probably about 5 to 6 years. So like I said, traditional BS, MS in computer science. I didn't even know I loved telephony because I didn't really think of it as a term at that time. But it was in 1984, my dad bought me a Commodore 64. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it has 64K memory, and he bought me a 300 baud modem. And my dad worked as on the line in Detroit, like on the car. They make cars and that type of deal. So he was not I think he graduated from high school, but he never went to college. But my dad told me that one day this computer thing is going to be big. So actually in that picture here, this is the Commodore 64. It sits in my office. I had actually a VIC-20 and then a Commodore 64, and then I had a hard drive that supported 1.5 megabytes. But I ran a bulletin board service out of my bedroom, a one-line bulletin board service, only one person could connect. But that's when I fell in love with communications. And at that time, it wasn't really telephony. It was just I wanted to be able to communicate and talk to people because where I was from, I didn't have any friends that were in computers, really. I definitely didn't have anybody that were my friends, like we were talking about, hey, let's get a BBS together. So having the ability to communicate with other people across the world was important. So the dependency graph here is really just shows how important it is for me to stay focused and to make money, because my wife wants money, and we have 4 kids that depend on my wife, right? And then obviously at the end of the day it's transitive. So the kids depend on my wife, and then my wife depends on me. So this is the agenda I'm going to talk through, right? So I have about a couple minutes, for kind of introducing the project to you, kind of talk about what the problems we're trying to solve, architecture, do a demo. Kind of the demo I showed you was supposed to have been part of that demo, but I did part of it for dangerous demos, so that's okay. I'll talk about our roadmap and take questions. So I have about 28 minutes of material. I'm going to go through it as quickly and keep you as entertained as possible. So what is it? It is simply a GUI for Kamailio, but with a focus on really SIP trunking and PBX hosting. So really what happens is that, and I'll get into it, what happens is that someone who's becoming an ITSP, they understand how to install free PBX or Asterisk, but then when they start growing, they start wanting to obviously be able to scale out their environment, have some fault tolerance to it, and they get kind of, they hear about Kamailio, but they get kind of scared. So we're trying to help them get through that portion of being scared. The core components is really Python for the GUI, obviously Kamailio as the core, RTP engine, which is optional. They don't necessarily need to use that. Some bash scripts that does the install process, Nginx and Docker. So like I saw the dangerous demos is that in order to do some of the things we need to do with provisioning and scaling out FusionPBX, you need to be a way of routing phone provisioning information. So we use Nginx to actually do the actual routing to the back-end FusionPBX systems. We could have actually just spent up an Nginx server on the host system, but our whole goal is, in the next few releases of this, is actually to become totally containerized. So really being able to have all the different pieces that you see here, the Kamailio RTP engine, the Nginx, all to be sitting in different Docker containers, and even the GUI to be in a Docker container. So the first entry to that was what I shown that doing dangerous demos, and what we have that we're going to release today, which is basically running Nginx inside of a Docker container and spinning that up on demand. This project started in last year in 2017. Sponsors, I didn't think anybody really cared about this thing, but a guy called me up and was like, hey, you want to sponsor this? And they had a unique situation. So SkyTel is a sponsor, and obviously the company I run is the open source, but they had a unique situation. It's like they were getting inundated by their customer base. Because what's happening is that their customer are larger organizations, and they want to use SkyTel as their provider, but they want to have something in the middle, the proxy calls to them. And they were going out, and as to Fred's point, they were going out looking at Acme Packet. They were going out looking at a bunch of different other solutions, and when they got that solution in house, it didn't necessarily integrate well. So SkyTel was spending a lot of time working with these customers. And it was like, you couldn't really charge them for it, but I'm assuming they couldn't really charge them for that work because obviously you want them to use your service, so you want to get their systems leveraging it. So anyway, they saw value in having some type of component, tool, package, whatever you want to call this, as a mechanism to get their customers up and going and connected to their platform quickly. Design principles. For me, I really, and I think Daniel hit it on the head earlier when he started asking these questions around, okay, so when, it was another product that was actually speaking, but he asked, like, what happens when you actually use your GUI the build a config? Is it kind of a mess, right? Because I'm used to that with FreePBX. So if you ever looked at FreePBX, in a lot of cases, it's very complicated to figure out what was going on once the dial plan is actually reloaded and rebuilt. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't do that. Secondly, we wanted to stay true to the Kamailio trunk. So we weren't like, we want to use standard modules, and really, by building this, we want to free ourselves up so that I can actually work on some modules and actually commit and do some things that I think that will help not just us, but also the community. The other thing, I wanted to be able to have something that could run within 10 minutes. Actually, it's 9 minutes exactly, actually, but 10 minutes to round up. But from the time that they actually can download and get it going. And then the other thing I want to be able to do is push back on feature overload. The feature overload is basically when somebody asks you for like features that don't have anything to do with what the core value system of the project is. So we get a lot of requests, and a lot of times we have to turn those down because we're not trying to be a generic GUI for Kamailio. We're trying to be very tightly focused with a goal of really being able to help more people to adopt the project. Because the more people that adopt the project, I think is better overall for the community. Not just from an open source standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. And the last thing is that, I already hit it. So provide a pipeline towards for Kamailio. Because basically, it's hard for us it takes, on average, a new engineer that joins my team, it takes them about 2 years to really be proficient. Because at first they're copying and pasting and stuff don't work and they can't figure out how to debug it. So it takes them a while. So we want to provide a pipeline, and sometimes the best way to do that, at least the best way I learn, is that I like to have a package solution, and then I can start looking at it and then breaking it apart. And I can start figuring out how these pieces work, and then from there I'll become better and better. And then lastly, this solution or this project is really, it's in its infancy. So, projects like Alex's project or Sipwise's project, to me, this should be a mechanism or a funnel that people who are, let's say, start off with really small ITSPs, this should be a way for them to be able to say, okay, I may use this for a while, but I want to grow into something that is more advanced, more sophisticated, has more use case, can support more use cases. So this is really a way to get more people involved and kind of move the process along in regards to being able to consume Kamailio and leverage it. Okay, so let's talk about what problems that we explicitly are trying to solve. So a lot of times people start off with customer A, and they have FreePBX, and then they got another customer, they get FreePBX, and then they get another customer, and then at that time they're like, well, I can use custom contexts, this module inside of FreePBX to try and get some separation of different customers to make it look like it's multi-domain, but that becomes painful, and they keep growing and growing, and then at some point they find FusionPBX, and they're like, now I have multi-domain support. So they kind of set it up into a configuration, as you see there, in a multi-node configuration, and they got a VIP that they can use, and they're doing primary, secondary failover type of situation. And then what happens is that that customer A obviously migrated to their FusionPBX environment, but customer A gets big. They grow by acquisition. So now they're huge. So now they need to be on their own box, right? So now you have to spin up another FusionPBX system, and maybe you have to put it into another cluster. And then customer B wants some custom stuff, which really doesn't fit in sometimes with some of the stuff you're trying to do in Fusion. So they get back to that situation where they kind of left from FreePBX, right? They're getting back to the point where they have a bunch of different systems still. So, really the issues with this is really, you can't easily kind of, help a customer grow, right? Because, the endpoints need to change, right? So now you got to go and explain to customers, because remember, these guys are are newer to SIP, so they don't necessarily know how to properly set up DNS and things of that nature. So now when they need to, let's say customer A spins out to another IP address, they need to go back and figure out, wow, how do I get that particular, all their endpoints to register? And it becomes a nightmare. There's really no central phone provisioning server. So so every phone that is that they have, that their customers have, needs to figure out how to get registered, which means they need to be provisioned, and that becomes a nightmare because that means I have multiple provisioning servers that I have to figure out how to get different phones access to. A lot of times you can't take the standalone FusionPBXs out of service and maintenance to hardware, so it becomes a challenge there. And then there's no central DID management. So all common things that you guys have dealt with. The second problem is around SIP trunking, and this is going to be funny because Fred just kind of hit this, right? Problem space 1, right? So you have these legacy telephony guys that have deployed, let's say, a Mitel system to a number of their customers. Right now, they figured out how to get FreePBX or FusionPBX to kind of do some routing, but they kind of know that they need to, get something like a SIP proxy that they can scale out and things of that nature. So, but they're scared of getting involved with Kamailio because it's just too hard. There's really no GUI that can help them do exactly what they want to do in a quick fashion. I'm supposed to be part of Dangerous Demos right now. So either the internet stopped or, all right, we'll go back here. All right, cool. All right, so the next problem space is that, again, you may have a customer that, or a set of customers that have like a Panasonic or a VIA system, and each one of these customers, they have deployed a session border controller at their facility for one reason or another, and it's aging, so they want to figure out how to replace that, and they want to figure out how can they do that in a fashion where they can make, as a ITSP or a legacy phone provider, they're trying to figure out how can they make money from this and build a solution around that they can deliver. And then the other problem space is that you have a lot of IT guys that actually start moving their business towards SIP or delivering phone services because it's more lucrative, there's a recurring revenue stream, things of that nature. But what they do is they spin up these systems on premise, and then they put in a backend SIP provider. And so in reality, in a lot of cases, they can be replaced easily. So a lot of those guys are like, well, how can I become more sticky in my customer? And they're like, aha, I can actually become a SIP trunking provider myself, and I can stand up Kamailio. So these are all kind of the problem spaces that I see, and we see it all the time, and we're just trying to find a way to solve this problem in a repeatable fashion. So let's talk about the architecture real quick. So the architecture is really, I think, pretty simple, and is pretty true to what Kamailio is today, a standard config. But so it can run on physical or virtual hardware. We decided to leverage Debian as our basis. We do have some support for Debian 8.9, and a gentleman committed some stuff for CentOS as well. So we're going to be committing that after we go through validation. But MySQL, Kamailio on top of that. RTP engine, again, is something that is optional. There's actually a parameter when you do the install. You can say, do you want RTP engine or not, and it'll actually install it and configure it. There's a web UI that's written with Python and uses Flask as the actual web server. So we actually don't have like a HTTP engine running the web UI. I truly believe that the code should be the server. It's very microservices type of framework-ish, right? And then we have a job scheduler, which is really responsible for going out and doing certain tasks in order to, and typically right now, the only task it really does is really goes out and talks to all the FusionPBX servers that we have and figures out what domains that they have and brings it into Kamailio. And then on the far right, on the far right is that you see Docker there and you see Nginx. So if you do want support for being able to do provisioning, you can click a button and it automatically will instantiate a Docker container and an Nginx server to do that routing. So I'm going to walk through the GUI now. Okay. So 0.4 is the current release. It actually hasn't been released yet. It's sitting there finishing up CI, but it will be released later today. So 0.35, I think, is the current release. But it's a very simple interface. So you got a dashboard, which down the road will actually have statistics on what the server is doing. We come with a list of carriers already predefined. Again, one of the biggest issues we heard, we did a lot of, the young guys who work on my team, I said, guys, go figure out what customers are having problems with. And one of the biggest problems is just sometimes it's putting a darn IP into Kamailio or configuring it properly so that it works correctly. So we just went through and said, all right, well, let's go grab a bunch of providers, and we just put them in there. So Flow Route, VI, Voice Innovations. If you want to be added, just ping me. So we made that kind of simple. The other thing we've done is really just make PBX and endpoints really, really simple as well. So so you can really go add a PBX or endpoint. You can give it a name. I'll just say testing. I can do IP off, or I can do username and password off. I'm just going to make up an IP here. And I can actually turn on FusionPBX domain support. And when you do that, it actually gives you some logic here that you actually can go log into that server and actually run. And really at the end of the day, what it does, it basically allows that DSIP router to be able to access the database of FusionPBX and grab the domain information. And so if you run this script, you don't need to put in a password for the FusionPBX database. I'll come back to this in a second, but we really wanted to make it really quick and easy. This is actually, I don't even like this really. We're going to make it so that you'll be able to go to that server and just use a curl command and curl the actual server, and we'll just actually download the actual script and run it for them versus having to cut and paste. The other thing we can do here, we also can do username and password off, right? Which is sometimes is an issue, right? So if we do that, then they can obviously register and with this username and password against the server. And then we have inbound DID mapping. So you can actually enter an DID, and then you can map it to one of the systems here. Like I have two FusionPBX systems already. I have one FusionPBX system already done. And what happens when you actually turn on the ability to do provisioning, it actually creates a entry for both the FusionPBX internal interface and the external interface, right? So that way you could have phones registered to it, and then also when the carrier comes inbound, it can also pass the call to it as well. And then we have something called global outbound routes, and this is where you can specify like a gateway list. So you can actually have multiple gateways that I've shown you before. You can just put them here in a common fashion. So you can put all the different gateways that you want to use. We also have the ability to basically build these routes based on the to prefix and also on the from prefix as well. So underneath the covers, you're probably thinking like, oh, this looks a little familiar. So under the covers, this portion is actually built using a combination of a couple things, but the derouting module is the primary module that is executing and running this. We want to add a couple of things to that. So as soon as we're done with this current release, I'm going to kind of start looking at a couple of things that we want to be able to add there. Okay, so now that I kind of gave you just a simple walkthrough, it's a really simple interface. I'm just going to just do a couple quick things. How long do I have?
We need to speed up a bit.
Okay, I'm almost done.
Okay.
How long do I have? Like 2 minutes or?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
So it's a coffee break, but then you need to have some time for coffee.
Okay, no problem. So no problem. I'll just go through and just finish up this part, and then we'll go from there. I think I've already kind of talked through the actual problems themselves, so I'm not going to talk through that portion. I just wanted to kind of lay out what that kind of looked like. Kind of the roadmap for this is that we're at the 4.0 release. The next release of it will be focused on the Debian.9.NET support. We'll be adding more support for Docker. So, like I said, we want to containerize everything. We're going to have a new UI. And we want to add a RESTful interface because people are asking us. They want to be able to interact with this in a RESTful fashion, and ability to limit concurrent calls, and then a UI for doing the domain syncing. Right now, when you do a domain sync, you don't see that it's actually syncing the domains. You actually have to drop into a command line, and then right here, what you're doing, I'm just running camcmd domain dump. So when I add domains to FusionPBX, you see them pop up there. And the last thing I want to talk about really quickly is this how to get engaged. So follow us. You can actually follow us on Twitter. Go to the website. Download it. Play with it. Email me, call me, just whatever you want. I'm here to help. Like, use it, whatever you want to do. So I'll take questions if I can get, if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
One day.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
Actually, question about flexibility means, okay, 2 questions. Flexibility first, it's a failover. So what I've pointed that you can point, for example, one DID explicitly to one PBX. But for example, if this PBX fails, what it's going to do? And the next one is, can I, for example, put some custom parts on the config file of Kamailio to, I don't know, have some my specific case, and not to ruin the GUI?
Yeah. So 2 questions. So right now, we're going to add high HA type of support in order to do it. Right now, it's more for maintenance, fault tolerance type of deal. We do need to add some support to if a particular server fails. What do we do with that? So we're going to add that. We just got to figure out the best way to do that. Besides, obviously, if you have your FusionPBXs in a cluster and you're pointing it to the VIP, that works. But if you have them standalone, what to do? So we're working on that. And then the other one was the custom code. Absolutely, we wanted to make sure that people can add custom dial plan logic to it or Kamailio code to it and be able to run it without a problem. So for sure.
Okay, so if you need to ask more questions, grab Mack during the last coffee break. So a chance to have a last chat with the pals here, because then are the most interesting presentation of the event. Come back after the
and I got shirts, by the way, too.
Thank you, Mack. Thank you.